Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's talk. Thank you very much for coming. This is part of a regular series of talks that we hold at CISA, the Center for India and South Asia here at UCLA. Before we start, I want to acknowledge the indigenous peoples who've lived on this land for thousands of years. The Center for India and South Asia, CISA at UCLA, acknowledges the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tavanga, the Los Angeles Basin and Southern Channel Islands. As a land grant institution, we pay our respects to the Hanuk Vetum, the ancestors, Ahihiram, elders, and Eyu Hinkam, our relatives, relations, past, present, and emerging. So this is the last talk we have this quarter, but we have a whole lot coming in spring quarter, some of them in person or hybrid and some online. So we'll put details of that in the chat. And I now want to hand over to my colleague, Professor Vinay Lal, who is going to introduce our speaker and chair this session. Thanks very much, Professor Lal.
Thank you very much, Anna. And let me begin by welcoming everyone as well. So I'm delighted to be able to introduce our speaker today, Professor Mohammad Zubair. So Mohammad is at UCLA, along with his colleague from the University of Peshawar, Sami Raza. We heard him last week. Both Dr. Raza and Dr. Zubair are at UCLA for the entire academic year on a postdoctoral fellowship from the Pakistan Higher Education Council. Now, Mohammad has long been interested in and here I invoke the title of his doctoral dissertation. He completed his doctorate from the University of Peshawar, where, as I pointed out, he's now on the faculty. And his doctoral dissertation was entitled The Interplay of Religion and Politics, a case study of Pakhtuns in Pakistan. And this is a subject in which he's been long interested, and he continues to do research on that. He went to the University of Freiburg to do some of his doctoral research in 2015 and has subsequently published a number of articles in journals on this and related subjects. So his postdoctoral research, once again, investigates the place of research in fomenting religious conflicts in Northwest Pakistan. And today he will speak to us on Islam, state, and society in Pakistan with a focus on the Pakhtun region. Welcome, Mohammad.
Thank you very much, Professor Lal. Thank you very much for the kind words for introducing me. Thank you very much, Professor Malcolm, for giving me the opportunity to speak at this privileged forum of UCLA. Thank you, everyone, and very good morning. Without wasting much time, I would directly come to today's presentation. The topic of my presentation is slightly different than what you might have received before. It is slightly modified than what has already been advertised. Let me share my screen with you, and then you can see the title of my presentation. Yes, the interplay of Islam and politics in Pakistan, changing trends in state-society relationship. As Professor Lal has already said that this is the topic that I have worked on in my PhD. I wrote my PhD dissertation on a similar theme, and then I continued working on the same topic, writing some of research papers and my postdoctoral research also revolves around the same theme of religion, that is Islam in the northwestern part of Pakistan. In today's presentation, I would focus on the interplay of the religion Islam and politics in Pakistan in the historical context. I would briefly give you an overview of the history of Pakistan in the context of how Islam has been used to achieve political goals, not only by the state, but some of the groups within the society. Secondly, I would also try to elaborate that how the state and society interacted with each other, and what have been the trends of this interaction between state and society in the context of Islam. Yeah. So, ever since the establishment of Pakistan, Islam became a scorecard for the political, institutional, and religious contenders for power. Islam was used to achieve, remove, sustain, and legalize regimes and governments of civilian and military actors, prime ministers, generals, religious parties, and ethnic and regional interests drew on Islamic rhetoric, values, and interpretations to advance goals and visions of the nation. Although in the beginning it was the state and political elites who introduced Islam to the political discourse of the country, however, it resulted in the Islamization of the society with the passage of time. State and society in Pakistan have developed a dynamic mutual relationship in this context that has been transforming over the past more than 7 decades. So I would be focusing on this dynamic relationship between state and society in the context of Islam, or political Islam to be more exact. Yeah, so Islam in Pakistan was politicized for the first time even before the creation of Pakistan. Before the partition process, the Islamic slogans were used, interestingly, both in favor and against the partition process. On the one side, there was All India Muslim League, who believed in the two-nation theory, that Muslims and Hindus are two different nations living in subcontinent, and they could not live together. So the Muslims of subcontinent needed a separate homeland for themselves, where they could easily practice their religion. And so in a way, the Islamic rhetoric, Islamic slogans were used by All India Muslim League to achieve the political objective at that time. On the other hand, there were religious clerics, there were the religious ulama, Muslim religious clerics, who were opposing the idea of partition or creation of Pakistan, again, on the basis of religion Islam. They were of the opinion that the territorial division of Muslims in the world, that is against the spirit of Islam. Islam does not believe in the nation-state system. Rather, Muslims living everywhere in the world, they form one nation, which is known as Ummah. So they believed in the concept of Ummah, and they were against this territorial division of Muslims. So the ulama, interestingly, they opposed the idea of partition of India. The main groups who were there in India, the main religious groups, religious forces, one of them was Jamiyat-e-Ulama Hind, JUH, and the other was Jamaat-e-Islami, JI. And both of them were against the idea of Pakistan, the idea of partition of India. However, there was a small faction of Jamiyat-e-Ulama Hind, known as Jamiyat-e-Ulama Islam, JUI, that later on supported the idea of the partition process. So they were in favor of the partition process. But overall, the religious forces, the ulama, they were against this idea, again on the basis of religion. So religion was used both in favor and against the partition process. So that's how the Islam started being politicized in the history of Pakistan. That was before the creation of Pakistan. Again, before the creation of Pakistan, there were elections in 1946, in which Jamiyat-e-Ulama Islam, it participated, and in NWFE, Northwestern Frontier Province, which is predominantly a Pashtun or a Pakhtun province, they performed very poorly in those elections. I'm mentioning here because it shows that the people of that region, the Pashtun region, they were more inclined towards the secular politics rather than politics based on religion, on Islam. So that's why Jamiyat-e-Ulama Islam, it could not succeed in that election of 1946. Now coming to the after partition or the post partition period, as we have seen that before the partition, the Islamic slogans were used by the political elites, by the state, in other words. But after the partition, this demand for Islamic constitution and Islamic state was by the religious parties, by the common people of Pakistan. They started demanding for an Islamic constitution and Islamic state. So religion or Islam that was first used by the state, now it started going out of their control, their hands. And now the people, on the other hand, or society, or some groups within society, to be more exact, they started taking control of this rhetoric and Islamic slogans, and now they started demanding for Islamic constitution and Islamic state and Islamic provisions in the upcoming constitution, etc. Apparently, a Western educated and secular leader, Liaquat Ali Khan, who was the first Prime Minister of Pakistan, he could not resist to these demands of certain groups within the society, and he presented and got the Objectives Resolution passed from the Constituent Assembly in 1949. On 12th of March 1949, he was able to got that resolution passed. So this was the first incident, the first time that something came in material, something was materialized in the form of giving something to the people, or in the form of Islamic constitution or Islamic laws, or something like that. Objectives Resolution was actually a document as a basic principles, the basic principles that should determine the future nature of the nature of the future constitution of Pakistan. So that was actually the document that became a basis, a foundation for the future constitution of Pakistan. According to the Objectives Resolution, the sovereignty in Pakistan belonged to God, belonged to Allah. And this very basic feature of Objectives Resolution was against the spirit of the modern day democracy, where they compromised Constituent Assembly compromised on the idea of popular sovereignty. The sovereignty belongs to Almighty Allah, and the people, or the representatives of the people who exercise this sovereignty, they exercise it as a sacred trust. So that was the crux of Objectives Resolution. Of course, it received criticism from various segments of the society, particularly the minorities. There were 10 minority members in the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan at that time, and all of them voted against the Objectives Resolution. But on the other hand, there was a large number of people in the society who appreciated this act of Liaquat Ali Khan. A couple of years later, in 1952, a group was formed, a group of religious parties was formed with the title Muttahida Majlis-e Amal, and they started demanding to declare the Ahmadis as non-Muslims in 1952. So that actually set the discourse for the future of Pakistan's politics. And in 1953, this was because of the riots that resulted after the demand put forward by MMA. And due to those riots in 1953, for the first time that Governor General Ghulam Muhammad, he gave the city of Lahore under the control of army. So technically, it was the first time that martial law was imposed in one city, one major city of Pakistan. So it showed the intensity of the riots at that time. This is Liaquat Ali Khan in the Constituent Assembly. Right. So after 9 years of the creation of Pakistan, the Constituent Assembly managed to frame the first ever Constitution of Pakistan in 1956. And as I mentioned earlier, that Objectives Resolution set the future discourse of Pakistan politics. The Islamic provisions were the main part of 1956 Constitution. Objectives Resolution became the part of the Constitution as a preamble. It was not justiciable part of the Constitution, but it became the part of the preamble of the Constitution in the beginning, and then later under Ziaul Haq, it became the part of the Constitution of 1973. According to the 1956 Constitution, Pakistan was declared as an Islamic Republic. The name of the country was Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Similarly, the Parliament was given the right of review of laws on Sharia. In other words, the Parliament could review any laws, and if found any existing law against the spirit of Islam, it could be nullified, it could be declared as null and void by the Parliament. Moreover, the Parliament could not make any law which was against the spirit of Islam. So that's how the Islamic provisions were introduced to the 1956 Constitution. Further, it also said that the head of the state in Pakistan must be a Muslim citizen. After 1956 Constitution, and it lasted almost for 2 years, and in 1958, the first martial law was imposed and the military General Ayub Khan, he took over the government. General Ayub Khan was seen as a secular ruler, and his initial policies also showed the way he was moving forward. Uh, he introduced another constitution. This time, a presidential system was introduced in Pakistan, unlike the 1956 constitution. And this constitution of 1962 originally was seen as a secular constitution. Initially, Pakistan was declared as a Republic of Pakistan rather than Islamic Republic of Pakistan. But as I have mentioned earlier, that the Islamic rhetoric was running out of the hands of the state. And now the society had taken the control of that Islamic rhetoric, and now they were demanding for Islamization in the country. So Ayub Khan again could not resist to the demands of the religious groups in the society, and he capitulated the demands of surrendered to the demands of religious groups, religious political parties, and then through an amendment, Pakistan was declared once again as Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Not only this, but he introduced all of the Islamic features or Islamic provisions in 1962 Constitution, which were there in 1956 Constitution. Not only this, but he went a step beyond this, and he introduced some constitutional bodies in Pakistan. For example, the Council of Islamic Ideology. The function of Council of Islamic Ideology, or the CII, is that they review the laws passed by the parliament, whether they are Islamic or un-Islamic, and they also give their suggestions, their recommendations to the parliament to enact certain laws that could make it easy for the people to observe the teachings of Islam in that sense. So, but there was a different motive, a purpose behind behind forming these constitutional bodies like CII. The motive was to take that control back from the people, the control over the Islamic or the religious rhetoric. Because the Council of Islamic Ideology was a forum in which there were state-sponsored or state-backed ulama. They were there in the Council of Islamic Ideology. So there were two visible groups of ulama in Pakistan at that time. On the one hand, there were traditional ulama, and then there were some modern ulama like Dr. Fazlur Rahman and many others. So this was actually the motive, to delegitimize the traditional ulama and traditional religious clerics within the society by making such constitutional bodies as Council of Islamic Ideology. So it was a strategic move rather by General Ayub Khan. Then we move towards the 1970 general election of 1970. And how the Islamization process actually started in Pakistan. 1970 election is a landmark event in the history of Pakistan for more than one reason. After this election, it was the first time that a religious political party formed a government, though in one province, the NWFP, the Pashtun province. Now it is known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or KB. So the north western frontier province started being ruled by a religious political party for the first time in the history of Pakistan after 1970s election. Though it was a coalition government. And another interesting fact is that this alliance of Jamiyat Ulama Islam, JUI, was with National Awami Party, which is a leftist, a secular political party, which is known as secular political party in Pakistan. So that is an interesting fact, that how a religious party and a secular political party, they formed a coalition to run the province of Northwestern Frontier. Mufti Mahmud became the chief minister of Pakistan. Mufti Mahmud is the father of Maulana Fazlur Rahman, who is the current head of JUI. This is Mufti Mahmud and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. So initially, it was the Pashtun province, the NWFP then, and now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in which the Islamization process was started by the state. Mufti Mahmud introduced certain Islamization policies. For example, he banned the liquor for the first time in Pakistan. He also reformed the Islamic inheritance laws. He also made some unsuccessful attempts in this regard. For example, he tried to make it mandatory for a person to read Quran in Arabic language if he or she wants to get admission in a university. So getting admission in university was associated with reading Quran and Arabic language. But as I said, it was an unsuccessful attempt. The government of Mufti Mahmud or JUI, it did not last long, and soon the federal government under Zulfikar Ali Bhutto dissolved the Provincial Assembly of Pakistan, and the province went under the governor's rule. Then Mufti Mahmud took the role of opposition. And as an opposition leader, he was even more powerful than he was in the government. And he started a movement against Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Tehreek-e-Nizam Mustafa was the main movement that ultimately overthrown Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. So in this way, Mufti Mahmud was able to achieve his political objectives again by using Islamic slogans and Islamic rhetoric. When we come to the federal government at that time, federal government was of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Pakistan People's Party. Interestingly, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was also known as a secular leader, and People's Party was known as a secular political party. But again, it was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto who, for the first time, introduced the policy of Islamization at the federal level. Here, I would say that it shows that Islamization as a policy was not like driven by the government or by the People's Party or by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto or Mufti Mahmud for that matter, but it was a state-driven policy, and there was establishment behind this policy of Islamization, and there were reasons for that. The first major reason was the East Pakistan debacle. 1971 was the year when Pakistan broke into two. the East Pakistan separated from the mainstream West Pakistan and became Bangladesh in 1971. So this incident was seen as a threat to the integrity of Pakistan in the future as well, because Bangladesh was formed mainly on the basis of ethno-nationalism. And ethno-nationalism was seen as a threat to the national integrity and security of Pakistan, particularly by the establishment. And Islam, or the religion, was seen and considered as a force that could keep the remaining territories of Pakistan united in the future. And that's why the Islamization process was started by the state in Pakistan. So this time, again, state took the driving seat, state took the control of Islamization, and it, in other words, it tried to impose the Islamic laws and Islamization process in the society. Other than this domestic factor, the East Pakistan debacle, there were some international factors as well. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto started the nuclear program in Pakistan, as we know. And this nuclear program was criticized, it received criticism from all over the Western world, particularly by United States of America. The US was not happy with the nuclear program initiated by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And Zulfikar Ali Bhutto needed the support of some international powers to carry on that nuclear program. So he, on purpose, he projected this nuclear program as of the entire Muslim world. And that is why he organized, he hosted the second OIC summit in Pakistan in 1974. And he was known at that time in Pakistan as the champion of Islamic Brotherhood. So he was in favor of, he had this idea of forming an ideological alliance with the Muslim state. So that's why he was also in favor of the Islamization process. Rather, he took certain steps in that direction. Though they were mostly the cosmetic steps. For example, he for the first time introduced the Friday as a holiday in Pakistan. Before that, it was Sunday, but he introduced Friday as a holiday because Friday is considered as a holy day in Islam. So this was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto who initiated the Islamization process in Pakistan. This is the evening of OIC summit in Lahore, 1974. Right. So the process of Islamization that was started by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, this process saw its peak, its zenith under the Ziaul Haq rule. Ziaul Haq imposed the second martial law in Pakistan, in fact, third technically. General Ziaul Haq came into power at a time when the world was divided into two blocks. And not only that, but soon after he came into power, Soviet-Afghan war started. And he took advantage of this situation to legalize, to legitimize his otherwise illegitimate rule in Pakistan. General Ziaul Haq, in the true sense, he actually Islamized Pakistan society. He introduced different policies, laws, ordinances in the country, due to which the Islamization saw its peak in Pakistan. First of all was the Hudud laws or Hudud ordinance. Hudud ordinance was basically a law based on Islamic Sharia, and under the Hudud ordinance, he introduced severe punishments for crimes like theft and adultery, etc. Hudud ordinance received appreciation and criticism both from the society. Later on in 2006, it was reformed and modified under General Pervez Musharraf, another military ruler in Pakistan, but it was in 2006. So originally that Hudud ordinance that was seen as a law which introduced severe punishments and received criticism, especially from the civil society in Pakistan. He further reformed the already existing blasphemy law in Pakistan, and he, as a reform, he introduced the capital punishment for blasphemy in Pakistan. He further went on to change the judicial structure of Pakistan, the overall judiciary of Pakistan. He introduced Sharia courts for the first time in Pakistan. And that way he affected the judiciary or overall judicial system, judicial structure in Pakistan that had a long-lasting effect on the judicial system. He also influenced the media at that time, and that media became a right-wing media, a conservative media, and this legacy even continues till date. Today, too, the media in Pakistan is known mainly as a right-wing media, the rightist media. So that is the legacy of the Ziaul Haq's regime. Although the things have changed a lot, but still we can say that that legacy continues. More importantly, he influenced the education system in Pakistan. He introduced new education curriculum in Pakistan. Not only this, but he also spread the religious seminaries in Pakistan, an alternate or a parallel education system. He introduced a parallel education, not introduced, but he actually spread those religious seminaries, particularly in northwestern frontier province at that time, in WFP, the Pashtun province. So there were hundreds of these madaris and religious seminaries, which were receiving funding from the Middle Eastern countries, particularly Saudi Arabia. So this education system, this new curriculum in Pakistan, new education system in Pakistan, whether the traditional or this religious seminaries, their curriculum was more ideological than academic. So it was it was an impact of that Islamization policy of Ziaul Haq that we are still feeling it in Pakistan. We are still we can feel those policies that were introduced by Ziaul Haq in Pakistan in different forms and shapes. Further, he promoted Jamaat-e-Islami, JI, in Pakistan. JI was an ally of Ziaul Haq during 1980s. I mentioned Jamaat-e-Islami here because this is very important. Important in the sense that how this promotion of Jamaat-e-Islami, how it affected the society or influenced the society. Jamaat-e-Islami is a political party, is a religious political party, which has a very well-organized students' wing. Its students' wing is more organized. It is more organized than any other student wing in Pakistan. And it is a party of the urban middle class educated people in Pakistan. And the presence of its students wing in almost all the universities and colleges in Pakistan, that enabled it to pass on that Islamization policies from top to the bottom. So the society got really affected, influenced by the Islamization process, by the Islamization policy, particularly when Ziaul Haq promoted Jamaat-e-Islami in Pakistan. This was the period 1980s when Soviet-Afghan war had also started, and Ziaul Haq promoted as so-called Afghan jihad, and there were jihadi training camps in the Pakhtun tribal areas of Pakistan, with the support of the United States of America and Saudi Arabia with their backing. So the material support was coming from these were actually rich countries, and other logistics were given by Pakistan under Ziaul Haq. So that was another reason. So Afghan war was projected as jihad. So that's why Islamization policy was much needed at that time to recruit people for that jihad, recruit people from the tribal areas of Pakistan in particular, and society in general. Right. So coming to the post Zia era or post Afghan war era, as I mentioned, that the Islamization policy that was started by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and in true sense, it reached to its zenith under Ziaul Haq. This Islamization policy resulted in the radicalization of Pakistani society, and particularly the Pakhtun society. Because of that Soviet-Afghan war and jihadi training camps in the tribal belt of Pakistan, the Islamization process actually radicalized the Pakhtun society in particular. And now there was the demand of Shariaization. Here I would like to acknowledge that this idea of Shariaization, I borrowed this idea from Dr. Farzana Sheikh. She discusses this idea in her book, Making Sense of Pakistan. So I borrowed this idea of Shariaization from Dr. Farzana Sheikh. So I just want to acknowledge this. Dr. Farzana Sheikh, actually, she is of the opinion that the Islamization process that initially was started by state, now it has transformed into the Shariaization, from Islamization to Shariaization or Shariatization. And now the social groups within the society, particularly the religious groups, they are demanding for Shariaization, which is a step forward than Islamization. And they demand complete Islamic law and Islamic Sharia being implemented in Pakistan. So that was the result of that Islamization policy and resultant radicalization in Pakistan. This Islamization policy also modified or changed the role of traditional religious clerics in the Pashtun society in particular. Previously, traditionally, these traditional ulama, or who are also known as mullahs, these mullahs or ulama, they were not involved in practical, in active politics. There were only some elite political leaders, religious leaders who were involved in the active politics, but the local traditional ulama, they were not engaged in political activities. But the Islamization process and the Afghan jihad, for that matter, that changed the role of ulama in Pakistan. And now they actively engaged in the practical politics in Pakistan. And this also challenged the role of tribal elders in particularly in Pashtun society, Pashtun region. Traditionally, previously, the ulama or the mullahs in Pashtun society, in tribal societies particularly, they were supporting the tribal elders, and the tribal elders were patronizing the ulama or mullahs in Pashtun society. They were not seen as rivals to each other. But now, when the ulama and these religious clerics, they engaged actively in politics, they became a rival group of the tribal elders in the Pashtun society. Since these ulama have influence over the people, they can easily control the sentiments of the people. So that is a major factor, that how the Islamization it took roots in rooted in the Pakistani society. So ulama played their role in spreading Islamization and related policies in Pakistan. In 1990s, there was a movement in the northern part of Pashtun province in WFP. This movement was known as Tahrik-e-Nifaz-e-Shariat-e Muhammadi, TNSM, or the movement for the implementation of Sharia law. That movement started in early 1990s, and it made the government to implement for the first time in 1994 the Sharia law in one division of the province. Again, interestingly, I would say that it was the government of Pakistan People's Party, which is known as a leftist and liberal political party, secular political party. So it was under Benazir Bhutto when for the first time the Sharia law was implemented in Malakand division in 1994. And Sufi Muhammad was, this is Sufi Muhammad, he was leading that movement in NWFP and Malakand division in particular. And this was the time after Soviet-Afghan war ended, and after the Ziaul Haq's period, when the Taliban rose onto the scene, both in Afghanistan and in the Pashtun areas of Pakistan. And majority of the Taliban, they were of Pashtun ethnicity. And that is because they came from this area where the Afghan jihad was was promoted by the state, and so these are some of the effects, the impact of Islamization policies, Islamization process in Pakistan that changed the dynamics, political dynamics in the country, particularly in the Pashtun province, as we have seen that Sharia law is being imposed in Malakand division. The ulama are challenging the role of the tribal elders, and there was a greater demand for Shariaization, particularly in Pashtun areas. The Pashtun areas, Pashtun population was radicalized, especially the tribal belt in Pakistan. So these were some of the effects of Sharia, of Islamization process in Pakistan. So here comes the trends in state-society relationship. As I mentioned that that in her book, Making Sense of Pakistan, Farzana Sheikh describes that relationship between the state and society, that the state initiated the process of Islamization, and then it went out of their control, out of their hands, and then the society took the control of this entire process and started demanding Shariaization and so on. I further elaborate it in a sense that I could see some minor trends, some more minor trends as well in this particular relationship between state and society in the context of Islam. In social sciences, there is a theory known as the pendulum effect, which says that the trends in culture and in politics, they keep going back and forth continuously. So based on that theory, we could find some trends in the mutual relationship of a state and society in that sense. As you could see that before the partition, it was the state or the political elites, to be more exact, that used the religion as an instrument to achieve some political objectives. Of course, the partition. And on the other hand, there were some religious political parties who were opposed to this idea, but religion was used by the political elites, or since there was no state of Pakistan at that time, so I use this term of political elites. So it was a top-down trend. It was the state or the political elites who were influencing the society in terms of Islamization or Islamic rhetoric, and they were imposing, you see, Islamic slogans on the society and on masses. Then after the partition, the trend changed altogether. And now it was the groups within society, or loosely we can say the masses, who started demanding for Islamic state. So we can loosely term it as a bottom-up trend. So now, after the partition, it was the masses who were demanding Islam, and the state was on the receiving end. So they were receiving demands from the masses. And then ultimately, state had to pay heed to the demands of the people, and they took steps in this regard, as we have seen before. Liaquat Ali Khan got the objectives resolution passed, and similarly, the subsequent constitutions, Constitution of 1956, Constitution of 1962, and even 1973's Constitution, all of them, they have Islamic provisions as integral part of the Constitution. Not only this, but the state, and at different times, they took different steps and measures in this direction. After 1970s election and during Zia's era, I mean, during Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and Ziaul Haq, the state once again it resumed its role of using or enforcing Islam as a result of that Islamization policy. So Islamization policy was started by the state, as I mentioned earlier. So again, it had become a top-down trend, top-down approach, where now the masses, the society was on the receiving end, and the state was imposing and using the name of Islam. In the post-Zia era, the society became more radicalized, and it started demanding for Shariaization. As a result of the Islamization policy, the society got radicalized, and now it started demanding Shariaization, which again was a bottom-up approach. So here was the trend that kept on changing after almost every decade. First, it was top-down approach, then bottom-up, then top-down, then bottom-up. And recently, we have witnessed a complex relationship between state and society in that context, especially with the emergence of the Barelvi sect on the scene. Previously, it was only the Deoband sect that was considered as fundamental group, as the fundamentalist group in Islam, who was demanding for Sharia law and Islamization and all that, whether it is Jamiyat Ulama Islam, it is Jamaat-e-Islami. So by and large, it was the Deoband sect. Deoband and Barelvi are two major sects within the Sunni sect these are subsects of the Sunni sect in Islam. But recently, there is an interesting development as the Barelvi sect, it came to the surface, especially with the emergence of Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, TLP, and this shows a complex relationship. Now we cannot see whether this is a top-down trend or it's a bottom-up trend, but here we can see a collaboration between the establishment and some religious groups within the society, Barelvi religious groups in the society. So both have a mutual interest, their own political agenda, their own political objectives, due to which they are collaborating with each other. And now Pakistan is going through another wave of religious extremism, and this time it is the Barelvi sect, Barelvi set of ulama, rather than the Deoband ulama, who were previously like demanding for Shariaization and so on. Keeping in view the entire this whole situation, and also realizing the fact that these religious groups are becoming so strong in Pakistan that every time the state has to to surrender before these religious groups in Pakistan. Keeping that in view and realizing this fact, now the state, I can say the state is once again trying to recapture its lost space in that sense. We have noticed that the current government in Pakistan, they are using the slogans like Riyasat-e Madina, or the state of Medina. So by using such slogans, they are trying to recapture the lost space, and this could solve two purposes, or there are two reasons for using such slogans and capturing the role back. Number one, this would delegitimize the extremist or fundamentalist groups within the society who are demanding for Shariaization and so on. And on the other hand, it once again the state would capture the driving seat, and once again, the state would be controlling the Islam and Islamic rhetoric in Pakistan. So, in that sense, we can say that the trend of state and society relationship is changing once again.
Mohammed, if I may just pardon me for interrupting you, but we are well past 11 o'clock already now. So, please ask you to conclude.
Okay,
yeah.
This is the last slide, and I'm just concluding my talk in a couple of minutes. Is it fine?
Yeah, just try to see if you can wind up in a minute or so, because we won't have any time for questions. I mean, we lose the audience completely.
Sure. So the account of Pakistan's political history shows that there is a complex relationship between Islam and succeeding political regimes and state institutions. Each ruler, whether military or civilian, sought to promote particular arguments about the appropriate role for Islam and Islamic oversight and legislation. Contested interpretations shaped debates on the 1949 Objectives Resolution requiring an Islamic constitution, on the secularist policies of Ayub Khan, and on Zia's 1979 Hudud Ordinance, seen as restricting equal rights for women. Politicians such as Zulfikar Ali Bhutto sought to frame and manipulate Islamic issues, even as they might be ultimately outmaneuvered, as was Bhutto, by competing discourses of appropriate Islamic conduct and political legitimacy. Zia's engagement with Islamist forces, from creating new provincial Sharia codes to Islamizing the 1980s Afghan jihad against the Soviet Union, had a double aim: to ensure that Islamization remained a state-sponsored and state-controlled exercise, and to provide legitimacy for the coup-maker who had overthrown Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. However, Islamization did not remain a state-controlled exercise anymore, and in the post-2000 period, the extremist, religious, and sectarian groups in the society took the role of agenda setting in this regard by demanding Shariaization rather than Islamization. So with this, I would like to end my talk. And thank you so much. Over to you, Professor Lal.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you very much. I have some thoughts and questions, but once again, I will first allow everyone else to weigh in. People can either just pose the question in the chat, or just let me know that they would like to ask a question, and then they'll have an opportunity to do so. I'll just call upon whoever wants to ask a question. So we do have a question from Ambreen Gul. Ambreen, go ahead, please.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, you are. You are.
Yeah, my question actually was about Islamization and how it has been used as an instrument. First of all, thank you so much for your valuable lecture. It was really nice. So was the instrumentalization just instrumentalization of religion? Was it purely tactical? And did the state never have any intention to actually Islamicize Pakistan? Or was Islamicization of Pakistan a combination of many factors, including instrumentalization of religion by the state. Thank you.
Okay, so should I respond to this question, or should I wait for other questions and then respond?
Well, no, Mohammed, I think you should, because I mean, at least the next question is a different one.
Right.
So I think you should. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. As I mentioned that Islam was used or was politicized even before the creation of Pakistan, during the Pakistan movement. So at different times, the state used Islam for different reasons. Initially, Islam was seen or was taken as a marker of identity, a national identity, particularly before the partition and during the initial years after the partition. But later on, particularly under Ziaul Haq, there was some geopolitical factors which actually led to Islamization in Pakistan. So that was not seen as a marker of identity anymore, but rather there were some international and regional factors due to which Islam became a political Islam globally, right? So these were the factors. So it was not only instrumentalization of Islam, but there were multiple factors behind using Islam and Islamic slogans in countries' political discourse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Amia Sharma. Can I call upon you to ask a question, please? You'll have to, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, please. Hello, Amia. You'll have to unmute yourself because you can't be heard. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I don't know if can everyone else hear? You
No,
cannot be heard.
I can't hear either.
Yeah, Amia Sharma, I can't hear you. Maybe you can. No, you cannot be heard. Mohammed, can you hear him?
No, I cannot.
Yeah, you cannot be heard, even though I think you have unmuted yourself. So I don't know what's happening. If you like, you can put your question in the chat box and then I can read it out. In the meantime, we'll just go to the next question and then I'll come back to you. Safura, can I call on you, Safura, to ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Yes.
You can be heard, Safura. Thank you.
Thank you, Zubair, for that very informative talk, and nice to see you again. My question is directed at your comment when you say there was a intentional radicalization of Pashtun society through the discourse of Islam. But this discourse that you're sort of presenting, that the state has been imposing from the top down, and I think it begins with, of course, Jinnah's rhetoric, very starkly binary rhetoric of Islam as this homogeneous entity and not recognizing other Muslim parties, not just the ulama, but like secular, so-called secular parties like the Khudai Khidmatgar that were so against the partition of India in one of the largest Muslim majority provinces. But I'm wondering about that Islam, that articulation of Islam, right? So the vernacular articulations of Islam that get invisibilized by this discourse of a very homogeneous Islam. And in particular, today we see, I think, a little bit of a pushback in that direction with the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, and even with the election of the ANP in Pashtun society. So I'm wondering if you could comment on the vernacular articulations of Islam, which are very diverse, if not syncretic anymore. They were perhaps syncretic at the time of partition, but maybe not so much anymore. But at least there's a different kind of Islam that's being hidden through the discourse of this very homogeneous Islam. So if you could, that bottom-up movement, what about that bottom-up movement is my question, essentially.
Okay, thank you, madam. Yes, now we can, or let me put it in this way, that like initially, the Pashtun society, there are two different things. You see, let me make it clear. At least personally, I see it as two different things: Pashtun masses and Pashtun elites in the Pashtun society. By Pashtun elites, I mean the ethno-nationalist leaders in Pashtun society. Ethno-nationalism, I personally believe that ethno-nationalism, it traditionally has been limited to the elites in Pashtun society only. And as far as the masses are concerned, the masses, they were mainly more inclined towards religion. And that is the reason, I think that is the reason that as you have mentioned, Khudai Khidmatgar movement, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, he boycotted the referendum at the time of partition, at the time of creation of Pakistan. He boycotted the referendum because I think that he knew that the common people, they are more inclined towards that religious Islamic rhetoric. And so, and this ethno-nationalism was limited to the elites, Pashtun elites only. But now recently, with the emergence of PTM, with Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, I think the trend has been changing. And now the common people, the common masses, now they identify themselves first as, you see, Pashtuns, and then any other identity, whether it is Pakistan or national identity, or it is religious identity, or whatever. So now the sentiments of ethno-nationalism, they are more prevalent and more visible in the Pashtun society as ever before. So yes, at this time, the state would definitely think over to use once again the instrument of religion to tackle with this situation. I know you would know what I mean. There is always there are some forces, you see, within the state apparatus who see such movements and such ideas in the society as opposed to the ideology of Pakistan, and they have always been trying to suppress such movement. But of course, it's a natural process, and now the things are going from bottom to the up, and let's see where it goes and how these changes transform into a more material and visible, you see, outcome. So time will tell us.
All right. So the question from Mr. Sharma was the following. He asked, is Riyasat-e-Medina a reference to Muhammad's, quote, rule during his stay in Medina before he came to Mecca? And I think that if I had to just kind of paraphrase that, I think the question is really asking for a very brief elaboration, at least, of what is meant by Riyasat-e-Medina.
Yes, exactly. Riyasat-e-Medina is a term used for the first ever Islamic state, the Islamic state which was formed by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in Medina. So the recent government in Pakistan under Imran Khan is using the slogan that we are going to make Pakistan Riyasat-e-Medina in the true sense, an Islamic welfare state in that sense, in which the people of Pakistan would be practicing Islamic principles and Islamic rituals and all that. So yes, it is referred to the same Riyasat-e-Medina established by Prophet, peace be upon him. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions that anyone else has? Anna, Professor Morcom, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you very much for that talk, very thoroughgoing talk. I was wondering if you comment on what's the kind of discourse concerning India in this context currently, because India is obviously undergoing fast desecularization, rising Hindu nationalists. I'm just wondering how that is impacting the kinds of conversations going on in Pakistan.
Yes. Can you hear me? Are you done? Should I respond?
Please.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, currently, interestingly, the situation in both countries, in both neighboring countries, in Pakistan and in India, is similar in some ways, similar in the context of the secular nature of India as a state, Indian constitution, and in Pakistan, where some time back, General Pervez Musharraf, he took certain initiatives to make Pakistan more moderate in terms of religion and to end the extremism and fundamentalism in Pakistan. But then after him, the situation it got once again reversed, and the sectarian and religious groups, they are becoming more and more visible and dominant in Pakistan, and even becoming more extremist this time. Similarly, in India, the situation shows that under the current government of Narendra Modi, the secular nature of India, at least it is being threatened by some forces, by some groups within India. Professor Lal would be in a better situation, in a better position to comment on this question. But I see a resemblance, a similarity both in India and Pakistan in this context, that the current regimes, both in India and in Pakistan, they are going on the same track, because originally, you see, initially, Pakistan was envisioned as a secular state by the founding father Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and now we see that the situation has changed drastically. Similarly, the same is happening in India, though the scale is obviously different in the two countries, but yes, at least under Narendra Modi, it is being threatened. The secular nature of the state is threatened.
And sorry, just to follow up, I mean, is this affecting the conversations that are happening in Pakistan itself about religion and state, in the ways people are thinking this, I guess, desecularization of India?
Yes, but there is a very small number of people, you see, a very limited, I mean, the civil society in Pakistan, which is a small group in Pakistan, who actually would like to view India and to make any opinion about India. And so, as far as the common masses are concerned, I mean, they are not that much into the debate of what is going on in India. It's a small group within Pakistan. I mean, the civil society who really compare Pakistan with India in that context. The common masses, the majority people, they do not even see compare the both countries in terms of what is going on in the context of religion also. But yes, a small number of people in the civil society, there are groups who actually compare, and then they see it as a common feature, a common thing that is going on in the two countries.
Thank you.
So, Mohammed, let me perhaps, by way of concluding this, take the opportunity to ask you a couple of questions. And I want to begin by following up on the very important question that Professor Morcom raised for you. I want to put it in a different language, though, because that opens up other kinds of possibilities and provocations, right? See, fundamentally, what she's suggesting in asking you the question is that it is not actually possible to have a conversation about some things unless one acknowledges the spectral presence of India. It's a specter, you know? And if you're talking about Islamicization, you're talking about all of this. It's, you know, Pervez Hoodboy put it very cuttingly. He said that in Pakistan, they're delighted at what's happening in India because India is becoming more like Pakistan every day. Okay. You see, now you see where the thrust of the question is. The question is not simply in a very, it's not really about a technical matter of whether, you know, people in the villages are talking about India and saying, oh, look at what's happening there. So we've been going along the right path anyhow because this is the nature of the two-nation theory. It's not so much that. It's how does the specter of India figure in all of this is one part of it. I want to put it more strongly, the other part of it, okay, which is, I think, only hinted, if at best, in your talk, although I think that my own reading of Pakistan and India is that that's a very crucial part of the story. What I'm referring to is this: there was a question that was posed to you, which the question was the instrumentalization of Islam in Pakistan tactical? And your response was, and I agree with your response, but there is something, it seems to me, missing from that. Your response was that, well, at different times, the state has used Islam for different reasons. Okay, and instrumentalized it for different reasons. So, for example, Islam can be instrumentalized because of mobilization. You want to mobilize the people. But there can be instrumentalization which would have to be viewed in the larger geopolitical context. For example, who wants to lay claim to saying that we represent the Ummah throughout? Who is a leader of the Muslim world? If Pakistan alone of all the countries in the world is Muslim countries in the world is a nuclear state, it de facto becomes a leader in a certain way. But Turkey is laying claim. Of course, Saudi Arabia is a custodian of the sites. You see, there are different claims in that sense. But this is the question. I would argue that one of the most fundamental tendencies in Pakistan is the move away from the Indic world. Move away from the Indic world, the turn westward. What I mean by that is very precisely this. I'm going to put it in a strong language as a provocation. You see that increasingly the people of the Muslims of the subcontinent over the course of the last several decades have been led into believing that their Islam is inauthentic. It's inauthentic because the real home of Islam is West Asia. And of course, the problem for Muslims in Pakistan and in Bangladesh was the proximity to Hinduism over a course of over a millennium. The proximity to Sikhism, that's less of a problem. But Hinduism in particular, that Hindus basically contaminated even Islam over there. And I don't think it's possible to understand Islamicization, that's my own view, in Pakistan until one understands how the Muslims are being gradually weaned away from looking to India at all. But of course, fundamentally, Pakistan is part of the Indic world. And this is, by the way, a problem in scholarship on Islam worldwide. I mean, I've spoken to lots of scholars and I've been shocked by the fact that people write books called Muslim Societies, like Ernest Gellner, and there's no reference to Islam in South Asia. You know, although this is the largest Muslim population in the world, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India put together is the largest Muslim population in the world. Right? So I think this is one fundamental question that I want you to address if you can briefly. And the second is this. There are other smaller questions, but I'm just raising these two large questions. Second is this. In India, at least, every study has shown over the course of the last several decades that communalism is fundamentally an urban problem. In India, the more educated you are, I regret to say, the more communal you are. Of course, you will also find among the educated a segment of those who are quote liberal, secular, all of that. But the element of communalization reaches far deeper into the educated than it does among villagers. So my question for you is that how does this question play out in terms of the rural-urban divide? Okay, in Pakistan, do you see this Islamicization? Leave aside the Pakhtun society for a moment, because if we're going to talk about the Pakhtuns, I would also like to hear one of the more interesting comparisons there might be with Baluchistan, where there is, as you know better than I do, an insurgency in Baluchistan as well. And I wonder how, for example, one can think about the role of the mullahs and the ulama over there, as opposed to KP and the rest of Pakistan. But strictly in terms of the rural-urban divide, I wonder how this Islamicization plays out. In other words, would Pakistan at all bear out the thesis that Islamicization in a certain way has been a more acute problem among the urban elite than it is, or the urban population generally, than it is among the rural population? I don't know. That's really a question for you.
Yes, I agree with you, Professor Lal. Yeah, the communalism is really a problem of the urban areas, even in Pakistan, not only in India, especially when we see the rural population of the Sindh province, where a large number of people, they are Hindu minority in Pakistan, who are living in the rural areas of Sindh. But in that interior part of Sindh, or the rural Sindh, you can hardly differentiate between Muslims and Hindus living in those rural areas. They are practicing the same rituals. For example, they are celebrating Holi and Diwali together. So that is not at all a problem. Communalism is not a problem, at least in the rural areas, even in Pakistan. But in urban areas, of course, this is a more acute problem. And this, I relate this question to your earlier question or the comment about different brands of Islam, different version of Islam. One is South Asian Islam, and then Middle Eastern or West Asian Islam. Unfortunately, the Islamization in Pakistan started or driven by the state. The state was enforcing or implementing the Islam which is known as the traditional Islam of the Middle East or the Western Asia Islam, and they totally disregarded the domestic or the indigenous dynamics of this land, of this region. So Islam in South Asia or in Southeast Asia, if we include Indonesia and that too, that is totally different from the Middle Eastern Islam. So here, I think the problem lies when you trying to impose something that does not fit to the society. Of course, people are conservative, people are religious minded and all that. But the nature of that religion, the nature of that Islam that is observed by the people in the subcontinent is completely different from what there is in Saudi Arabia or in the Arab world. So this is, I think, the thing that the policymakers should think upon. And if they have to, you see, Islamize the society, they should think upon this factor that Islam at least should be that Islam which is compatible to the people of this land, and not the Islam which is, you see, is practiced in somewhere else in other parts of the world.
Thank you, Mohammed. Are there any other questions that anyone else would like to raise? All right. So, Anna, is there anything you want to add, or can we then just conclude?
There is a question from Sami in the Q&A, just popped up.
Okay.
Perhaps we can take that and then conclude.
Yeah, sure. Sami? Sami, may I ask you, may I call upon you to ask a question? Sami, can you hear me? Anna, I'm not getting any response, so I think we should probably call it a day.
I agree to demute himself. Well, thank you so much, Mohammed. That was a really fascinating talk and discussion. Thank you very much, Professor Lal, for chairing, introducing, and throwing in all that you did in those last few points.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.